I have been invited to participate in this ceremony this morning at a time when I was down with a particular bout of the flu. I've been in bed for the last 2 days or working at home because I was in such bad shape coming from Tobago on Saturday with this bug, and I desperately wanted to be here, and this is my first outing for the week. And if I do nothing else for the week, I would have felt that I've had a good week by being here today, because what this project represents is the best of the hope of Trinidad and Tobago at this time. And as head of the government, I really wanted to associate myself with it. More so, my own background as head of the government today allows me to say to Mr. Dinny and to Mr. Espinier, who spoke this morning about government's perspective, or what they would like to see the government's perspective become. And I would say to you, you're pushing on an open door and you're talking to the converted. Many years ago, I was the Minister of Planning and Development, and you would have heard Mr. Dinny mention to the year 2003. I was Minister of Planning and Development in 2003, and one of my assignments was to initiate the Vision 2020 program as a national roadmap. So when he mentioned this morning that Vision 2020 had something that attracted him to this outcome, I remember at that time that I had something to do with that, and I know something about that. Then later on in 2004, I became Housing Minister, and we embarked upon attempting to solve the problem that Minister Randall Mitchell mentioned a while ago, which is this whole question of satisfying a very genuine need for homes, housing solutions in Trinidad and Tobago. At that time, the government took the initiative, and it got to a point where the catalyst being government expenditure became unsustainable. The reaction became unsustainable. But I was the minister who, during that time, embarked upon approximately 20,000 housing starts, funded entirely by the state. And that did two things. It confined a large amount of government revenue to a problem which could have got some more significant private sector revenue. And also, it created an expectation on the price of those potential homeowners that they will be satisfied by the state's output, attracted largely by the heavy level of subsidy that was associated by the state's program. Now, there's a role for subsidization in many things, even in the housing program, but there comes a point where subsidization becomes waste. Because if you subsidize the wrong thing or the wrong persons, then you're wasting government's money. And more importantly, you might be spending the subsidy for the benefit of those who can get by without the subsidy, while those who need the subsidy are now put in a hopeless situation. So coming back to the situation now where the government, even if the government wanted to continue that program of funding and solving by itself the demand for housing in the nation, even if we wanted to do that, it is not possible. It is not available. The funds are just not available. But the government knows that there's a role for the private sector. And there are people in government who are not anti-private sector. As a matter of fact, will be making demands on the private sector. When I was housing minister, the very land on which West Hills is built on now, the private sector offered that land to the HDC. We had just formed the HDC from the NHA. When the owners of that land offered that land to the state to be part of the state's housing program. But when we looked at the price at which they were prepared to offer the land to the state, we took a decision at the level of the Ministry of Housing that the government would not entertain that purchase, and that such a development should find its way into private sector funding, and that the private sector should do that. Because if the government bought that land at the price at which it was going to be made available, and then develop it, the level of subsidy that would have had to go with that project would have made it quite unacceptable. So we did not. And I had the pleasure of looking on and seeing development taking place on that land. And the private sector income and the private sector effort got the land bought from the owners in some arrangement, and the construction has taken place. And today, some very significant modern and successful buildings are on that site without state expenditure and without state subsidy. And there are owners there who are paying for those units. And in fact, what has happened there is that there has been a mobilization of funding from the private individual's pocket, paying for his or her apartment. The developer who would develop it would have sold it to them, and it all would have been done in a way in which it should have been done, but could have been sidetracked into subsidized government housing had we gone ahead and bought that land in 2004, thereabouts. So it has happened. We've seen it work. We've seen it work, and therefore we expect it to work again. This company, Home Solutions, is a company that we'd like to see multiply its effort and see other companies follow in its footsteps and do the same thing. Because the number of 160 odd, I would take out 40% of that as double applicants. Because you know what's been happening in Trinidad and Tobago. If you apply 3 or 4 times, you multiply your chances of being called up. There's a lot of that happening with that list, but the list is very large. When I was housing minister in 2003, when I got in there, the list was, they told me the list was 40,000. And if we had subtracted 30 or 40% from double applicants and so on, let's say we're dealing with 30,000. By the time I left there in 2007, because we were building and making houses available, there was a rush of applicants, and the number exploded to 84,000 or thereabouts when I left there in 2007. And of course, the government was building houses and making houses available at very attractive terms, and the number grew to over 100,000, to the point where middle-class people who otherwise would not have even dreamed of living in an HTC house were in the forefront. When we went to build the houses in Federal Villas, there were objections from the neighborhood that the HTC was coming to build houses there and would drag down the neighborhood. I had to fight that because the HDC had moved itself into building where land was available, building to suit the neighborhood, but again, you ended up building for persons who really should have been looking to the private sector. We did the same thing in St. Augustine when we built Fidelis Heights. There was objection from the neighborhood that the HDC was coming in and we'll drag down the neighborhood. Of course, that wasn't the plan. We were building to suit the level of the neighborhood, but again, catering for persons who otherwise would not normally have looked at the HDC for housing. Then we got to Victoria Villas in the Diego Martin area, where we prepared a site and built 3 towers of 260 units. Again, there was objection from the neighborhood, but we built to suit the neighborhood, and today, unfortunately, that is the straw that broke the camel's back. Because when we discovered what had happened there in the end, by the time the full expectation of building that to the highest level, where those units are now multi-million units, way beyond even the best that was available on the HTC system. And now we determined the time has come for the HTC to get back to its moorings, which is to build for those persons who are least able to afford, especially those who are not able to afford a mortgage, but could afford a rental, and in some cases require state-subsidized housing. The HTC should focus on that. So whatever monies the state would use in building should focus at that level. But for all persons who can afford a mortgage of any level, then we should be able to partner with the private sector, or the private sector should be able to, on its own, like in this project, to do it and satisfy the needs. So we've come full circle from the $14,000 Diamond Vale house in the 60s to the $4 million HTC house in 2016. And clearly, the cabinet has taken the position that the HDC needs to get back to its moorings. And that is what the minister has mentioned. And what we have done, we sat down in the last few months and tried to figure out how this partnership with the state can work. Will it work? And the answer is a resounding yes. Because at the HDC, we have approximately 25 or 30,000 people who are already screened and have been shown to have the ability to afford a mortgage. They are on an HDC list where it may never be satisfied, because there's no way the HDC could now be building 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 houses a year, because the government money is just not there to do it. But if the private sector mobilizes in the way that you're mobilizing now, and the HDC makes available to you these people who are needing those houses with their own individual ability, then the state can go further and be partner with you, because the state, as trustee of holding those state lands, when the state makes those state lands available to you on which you would build, we will negotiate the value of those lands, put it in the project, and take it into account in the way of what the houses will sell for, and any element of subsidy which the state wants to apply to those units, we can work out in the price point and determine how the state ensures that the right people get the benefit of those subsidies. But you are house builders, and all you need is a market to take it off your hand. And the one good solid market that exists in Trinidad and Tobago today, that one can guarantee is a demand for housing with people who are willing to do that thing, which is to take the responsibility of investing in that unit called the house into which you will make your home. That is still a strong part of our culture. And even if half of the people on the HDC list are genuine applicants, we're talking about 60,000 people to build for. And if we build in the way that we can, using the inputs that we have, moving the financing that might have been just lying in the banks or lying in people's accounts, then we can generate economic activity, which could be a tremendous fillip at a time when we need economic activity to generate economic growth and prosperity in Trinidad and Tobago. The government's approach is to encourage this, partner with it, and make available the lands that are approved for housing development. Much of that on the HDC list comes from East-West Corridor applicants, largely because that's where much of the infrastructure is in the country and where much of the population is. There are other pockets of applicants elsewhere in the country, but have been largely satisfied in the central and south area. A lot of the HDC effort in the last few years, because land was available in those areas, we had far more success down there. But we now have available to us some access to other state lands and other lands which come under state control, and it is the state's intention to embark with private sector support, particularly the support of the banking community. And I say that because when I was housing minister, we tried to have an explosion like this. And what the government tried to do then was to ask the banking community to make funds available to the government's program to fund low-cost housing. We had a very interesting approach in there, and at the end of the day, that didn't find favor with the banking community. And now, this is a different model. And this model, I think, has found favor with the banking community. Otherwise, Mr. Harford would not be here, and he would not be partnering in there. So I think we've solved one very serious problem there, that the funding is available. We've heard that the technology is available. We've heard that the land is available. And I'm saying that the willingness to partner with the private sector is available. And we know that the list of applicants is there and available. So in fact, in short, there is no impediment. What I've heard in the realm of an impediment is the whole question of approvals, the state's bureaucracy. And that is a very serious problem. When the government announced in the budget debate and the budget presentation by the Minister of Finance that we would be embarking on this initiative, the Minister of Finance mentioned, with the approval of the Cabinet and Prime Minister, that in order to acknowledge the potential for the bureaucracy to slow down this kind of project, this kind of process, that the government will allow a task force to be formed, chaired by the Prime Minister, bringing together all the decision-making agencies in a sort of a one-stop shop arrangement to ensure that the state bureaucracy does not stymie this project. Of course, this is Trinidad and Tobago. The reaction to that was that this is wrong because it would allow the Prime Minister and the government to involve in favoritism and corruption. Some people see the glass half full and some see it half empty. We see this arrangement of the task force, chaired by the Prime Minister, having under his direct monitoring, not just control, but monitoring and moving these matters as a responsibility of the government, where we bring TNTech, WASA, Town and Country, and that each project carries its own unique identifier. So all the persons who are involved in doing or saying something about that effort, from time to time, on a fortnightly basis, will report to somebody who is overseeing the shoulder to ensure that the state's bureaucracy does not stymie what is important for urgently needed economic activity in Trinidad and Tobago. I've put together that team already. I have a small team of experts working with me. The first meeting ought to have taken place on Monday, but as I told you, because I was down with the flu, I wasn't able to be there to chair the first meeting. But I had Minister Imbert chair that meeting. The meeting took place, and it is something that worked before. I mentioned to you that when I was housing minister, and we embarked on what was in effect the largest housing program the country has ever had, it was because we had done that. As Minister of Housing, I used to chair twice a month a group of those same people who are required to make the decisions to move the process from concept to an approved entity. And we'd meet in the Ministry of Housing, and interestingly enough, what I found when we started doing that was there was a growth of enthusiasm on the part of the officers, whether they were at the Ministry of Works, at the Ministry of Housing, at Town and Country, at the Fire Service, wherever they were, because they were involved in seeing something useful being done, and they could bring to bear their own input. A level of enthusiasm grew in that committee. And that is how we were able to get a number of sites cleared very quickly, and to get work done, and to get those number of housing starts. So what we are offering now in this program is not new, it's a proven model. And I'm going to chair this committee for at least a year to ensure that the persons who are required to give the clearance to proceed do so, and not have situations which are common. For example, I've had complaints when I was planning minister of people applying to the Town and Country Department, and the application falls to an officer who goes on leave. And until the person comes back from leave, the application is not dealt with because the new person did not see it as a priority. And all kinds of arrangements in the public service which ultimately have the effect of disregarding time and causing a loss of opportunity to persons who easily could have been on a site working, but no work has started because the approval has not been granted. As I inquire into these matters, I am told that there are a number of applications that are in there. If only they are approved and a yes has been given, the investor is ready to go, they're ready to start work, and you start work, it means you start to employ people. You start to buy materials. You start to put things in the ground. So applications being approved in a speedy way. Nobody is saying to undermine any requirements of any state agencies, just to do them faster. And instead of doing it tomorrow, do it today. And we are, at the level of the government, offering to the private sector that support, that task force that we're talking about, and putting a unique identifier on each project that we'll be able to monitor to make sure that the state's bureaucracy is not an impediment. And if we do that, then we would have removed all the obstacles in the way that promises an explosion in housing development in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to say to those listening who would want to live in an improved neighborhood or to invest in something that would do well for you and your family going forward, because the economists will tell you that 1/3 of your income is a good yardstick for how much you spend on housing, shelter. And if you have an income, put aside 1/3 somewhere, or the ability to borrow, so that you would be able to afford a unit to house your family. And as it changes, more and more persons would be expected to carry that personal burden and that personal investment for your own benefit. And if we do that, a lot of the problems in housing in Trinidad and Tobago will disappear, I would say, within a decade. And of course, that has a knock-on effect. A lot of the social problems that we face in some of our inner city communities and in some of our depressed communities, a lot of the social problems, including crime and criminality of all kinds, can be traced back to the conditions of housing in which some people exist or participate. So as we improve the housing stock, we improve the social standing of the nation. Children are reared in different conditions, in better conditions. People feel better about themselves. And if you have a stake in this country, the easiest stake to have in this country is a house. And of course, someone said earlier this morning, or Mr. Dinny said, that he and his family, they have their roots in Trinidad and Tobago and they don't expect to go anywhere. I join you in that, sir. We too, at the level of the government, we have both feet planted very firmly in this country, and we believe in the destiny of Trinidad and Tobago, which lies in our hands. The area that you're going to build in East Lake is an area of great interest, in that Arima and the eastern area of Trinidad and Tobago they're poised for development going forward. A lot of open spaces in that area. Unlike Port of Spain, Diego Martin, Barataria, where we've used up most of the land, we have a lot of room in the eastern counties area. There are some developments taking place out there that would make this housing project most opportune and very valuable. One, this government is insisting that our diversification program would include, by necessity, the developments we had in Wallafield, which we are now returning to, the E-Tech Park, and the University of Trinidad and Tobago. These are two state-driven investments that would see interest in the East grow. The University of Trinidad and Tobago is now a major part of our landscape and the future of our young people and our technical development as a nation. In E-Tech Park, we expect to complete that park and to make it available for business. And if there's business there, people who work there would prefer to live close by. And these kinds of communities will attract workers from those industries. We are also embarking on the improvement in the road infrastructure. We have just awarded a contract to upgrade the road highway from Komuto to Manzanilla, which will take us around Sangre Grande, so you can move easily around Sangre Grande onto the East Coast. What that road also does is to give us the starting point up to Toco and on to Tobago. These are projects for which this government has a mandate and for which this government is ensuring that we make do with what we have available to us, find the resources, and put the infrastructure in place so that those parts of the country can grow and develop to contribute to a wider national economy of Trinidad and Tobago. Well, as we go further east, we are removing the stop barriers on the main artery. The government has just awarded a contract to build the overpass, the Curab roundabout. I can tell you, by going back out to tender and by ensuring that there's free, fair, competitive tendering, that bidding has come back in now about $100 million cheaper than it did a year ago, 2 years ago. So we're getting the benefit of competitive tendering from some of our contractors, and that contract has been awarded. Or the last I saw, the clearance was given for it to be awarded. So very soon work will start on that. The next junction that we'll have at one of those is at the Piarco airport junction there at Aruka. So the intention is to have a non-stop route all the way to Arima. And when we do that, it means that living in Arima would not be living far away from anywhere in the East-West Corridor. And that's why Arima is so central to us. East going to Tobago, east going to Mayaro, south going to San Fernando, and west going to Diego Martin. Arima is pretty much going to become the center of Trinidad, and by extension Trinidad and Tobago, because if you go as far as Charlottesville and as far as Point 14, you find Arima is pretty much in that area. Fortunately, we have a fair amount of land around there, much of it being state land, and of course some of it is going to be coming into the housing program, into which we hope to partner with this kind of development. Now, as we do that, we expect that the benefits will flow as quickly as the project starts. What we would like to do on behalf of those persons who would like to get involved as homeowners, but for whom the higher end might be beyond their reach, is to bring our efficiencies and government's input in some way to bear in such a way that we are thinking that housing units, satisfactory housing units, in the order of 600 to 700 to 750 would be available and plentiful for such persons who are eager to make their contribution and get involved. So if we build for the whole range, which is the lower middle income, the middle income, and the upper middle income, in this program, the economy of Trinidad and Tobago will benefit significantly. Another good thing about this initiative is that a huge amount of it is local. A lot of it is local. It's aggregate, it's cement, it's local lumber, it's local skills, a lot of it is local. So we can expand in a rush here without too much strain brought about by an inability to fund it through foreign inputs. There's something else too. As we get better and sharper doing it in Trinidad and Tobago, I want to see companies like Home Solutions look outwards, taking our model to areas where we can supply this to other people. We are not the only nation where housing and finding housing solutions is a priority. We have just had tremendous destruction in the Caribbean. There's a lot of money coming back into the Caribbean now from insurance companies for rebuilding, and I see no reason why Trinidad and Tobago companies should not look to some of these territories to do some of the same kind of business out there, because I know that we know how to do this. So thank you very much for the opportunity this morning of identifying with this very positive side of our national effort, and I wish you all success, and I look forward to be there when your first set of homeowners come to take up their nights in East Lake. Thank you very much, and continue to have faith in Trinidad and Tobago.